You are listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with Rob Reed and Josh Galicki, bringing together the love of nature and photography. Episode 26. We discuss warts and all with Matthew Sullivan. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with me, Rob Reed, and my co-host Josh Galicki. Hey Josh, how's it going?
Hey, good, Rob. Good.
Yeah.
I feel like we just spoke, which I think we just did. Not that
Well,
long
we
ago.
did last week.
We're on a roll here. This is good.
We are on a bit of a roll, so I guess nothing too much is new with you, except that obviously we have a new prime minister, and let's not talk about politics your side of the pond. I think we kind of touched on that last time.
Culling and processing. That's about it.
Culling and that's a really good way of putting it. But, anyway, so yeah, not much is new since we last spoke, but I am off to the bird fair tomorrow, so that should be fun. So that's on the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So I'm going tomorrow, which is Friday. So yeah, go up, hopefully meet up with a lot of the wild art judges. So hopefully with Victoria and David, Rebecca. And some of the people from OM System and that sort of thing. So yeah, it'd be good to catch up with people that I haven't seen for a while, sit and see what else is going on the bird fair. It's always an interesting place to go. But,
is that still in Rutland, Rob? Is it still?
Yeah, they do it on the Rutland Showground now, which actually, from my point of view, is better than where it was. Well, it's easier to get to anyway.
Yeah.
So it's in Rutland. So that's a 3-hour drive for me in the morning, and then 3 hours back again because I'm only going for the day. But it's always an interesting place to go, and I enjoy it every year. So just catch up with some friends. So it should be fun. But anyway, today we are joined by a guest. As I alluded to in the intro, Matthew Sullivan, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, what's new in the world of Matthew Sullivan? We were chatting before we came on, and you've been all over the place and been sort of driving long hours today or something. So,
yeah. So, my girlfriend, well, actually, now fiance, says we got engaged in Iceland.
Congratulations!
Thank you.
Congrats.
She has summers off because she's a teacher. So we drove from Florida to Jersey to spend 2 weeks with my family. And then we went to Iceland and drove all over Iceland for 8 days. So we've been doing a lot of driving. And then got back 2 days ago and now drove up to Massachusetts. So we're going to be here for another 2-ish weeks. So I'm pretty hot and bothered at the moment because it's hot out and it's been a long couple of days, but excited to be here and talk about all things wildlife photography.
Yeah. So were you shooting in Iceland, or was it more of a holiday?
Both. So yeah. I mean, Iceland's spectacular scenery-wise. So we went and saw some. This is the second time we've been there. This time we did all new places that we hadn't gone to the first time. Got to see puffins for the first time, which was amazing. They are an absolute blast to spend time with.
They're just so cool, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And they're just fun they just make you happy to watch them. They're hopping around and they don't really seem to mind you. And obviously they look kind of goofy. So we were out at the westernmost point of Iceland, which is the westernmost point in Europe, and had, hurricane force winds ripping across the cliffs, and the birds are out there just having the time of their lives. And we're standing up there trying not to fall off. But it was a lot of fun. And then we did a little bit of underwater, a couple dives up there. But yeah, Iceland's beautiful, and there's so much to see. You could go there, 50 times and probably still have things to go back that you haven't seen yet. So it'll definitely be worth at least a third trip.
Apologies for my dog cutting in as well, by the way. Told you she might.
I'm sure mine will at some point as well. So.
Yeah. Sorry,
Josh, for herping though, right, Matt? In terms of Iceland,
there's lots of spiders, but no reptiles and amphibians in Iceland. And we actually saw, I think, 3 spiders, and they were not small. Oh. So Iceland has a decent amount of. I think they have 50-something spider species.
Oh, didn't know that.
Way more than I would have thought.
Yeah.
And then obviously tons of birds everywhere, especially this time of year. 24 hours of daylight was cool, but also hard to get used to. because it's 1 a.m. and it looks like 5 p.m. So you're like, I feel like I should be doing something, and what you should be doing is sleeping, but you're not doing that because you're out doing whatever else. But it's a really cool place.
Yeah. No, I found that a bit weird when we went to Shetland last year. You sort of, it doesn't really ever get properly dark.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got a couple of hours, and I was seeing hedgehogs out in the daylight, which was a bit weird. Well,
Yeah.
they've got no choice, have they?
Yeah.
But talking about seeing weird things in daylight, I've just got to share this with you. I was out with Sky, was it last week? It must be, out on their usual walk. And all of a sudden I heard this rustling in the hedgerow, and out popped this large mammal, which I instantly assumed was going to be a hare, because we see quite a few of them on our, and we bump into them all the time. And it took me a while to register that actually Sky was face to face with a badger in broad daylight. And I've only ever seen one in broad daylight before like that, which is in fairly similar circumstances, when it was a youngster that just sort of came across a path. But this was a fully grown adult. So they sort of looked at each other for about 5 seconds. And I'm thinking, oh, God, don't attack each other. This is going to be a nightmare. And it ran off, and then quickly pursued by 2 more. So I saw 3 in broad daylight, which, I said I've never seen like that before in broad daylight. So that was pretty cool. But anyway,
That is cool.
I digress. So today we thought we got you on, Matt, because we wanted to talk to you about all this photography, this great photography that you've been coming out with, this sort of the amphibians, the reptiles, and all the underwater stuff. And we thought we'd have a, if you pardon the pun, a deep dive into all of that. So why don't you, for those people that don't know you, just introduce yourself and give everybody a little bit of background.
Okay. So I live in Florida. We live in Florida. So it's a good It's a good great state for diving. It can be really good for reptiles and amphibians when it's not brutally hot. And unfortunately, Florida especially has been taken over by a lot of invasive herp species. So the native herping in Florida is kind of on the downswing, which is unfortunate, but I don't know if there's any reversing it now, but that's depressing. So I started getting into reptiles and amphibians when I was very little, because we had a creek at the end of my street where I grew up, and my dad introduced me to frogs, toads, turtles, snakes, all that kind of stuff from probably before I could walk, and it just stuck. And same with fish. They bought me underwater fish books when I was little. They took me snorkeling for the first time when I was 5. And it's been a long and expensive road since then, because it hasn't stopped. And the obsession has only gotten greater. And then especially when you pick up a camera. And now a lot of, almost all of my free time is spent searching for either reptiles and amphibians or something underwater, occasionally a bird, but mostly the former. Yeah.
Because
this is pretty bad intro on my part, but I tried my best.
I mean, this is a common theme, isn't it, with our guests, Josh, that it seems to be that the subjects themselves were the first interest, followed by the photography, rather than being the other way around. When we I mean, sort of talking to so previous guests. I mean, it's pretty much all been the same, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the love of the subject, right? I think that drives a lot of photographers, and I think that's probably the best progression that I see too. I mean, you got to love and appreciate your subject versus just photographing something you really don't know about or appreciate. So, and most of to your point, Rob, most of the folks we've spoken to have gone through that process.
Yeah, so I'll still go out and look for all those kind of things without a camera, because I still love to do that, and I love those animals for the sake of the animals. But photography of those genres of wildlife is for sure my favorite thing. So if I can take pictures of them, I'm going to take pictures of them. And the underwater is probably my favorite. Well, it is my favorite, but obviously it's not as convenient or as accessible necessarily as a toad or a frog or a snake. So I think that's one of the other reasons that I like the reptiles, is they're a lot more accessible than underwater is necessarily. especially before I moved to Florida, because New Jersey has some diving, and that's where I lived before, but it's not a diving state. Whereas Florida is the diving state in the US.
Yeah, sort of warm, clear waters most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When there's no hurricanes brewing, it's pretty good.
Well, and they're becoming a little bit more frequent these days, aren't they?
Yeah. They are indeed. Last year we got lucky and we didn't really have any that screwed with us. And this year they've already had one big one, which we fortunately were not there for. Although it didn't really get Florida too bad. So hopefully we luck out and can skate by again this year, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that one. But no, I think that sort of that love of the subject drives a lot of the artistry and the imagery as well. You know, when you really understand something and you really love something, I think that comes across in the images that actually you end up producing. So it's not just about the skill of using the camera. I think that's a very, very small part, you know, of photography. I think it's more about understanding the subject and having an eye for an artistic or inventive image, something that's a little bit different. I think that's a really big part of it. Josh, I think you'd agree with that, wouldn't you? And certainly, you know, for
Absolutely.
The two of us, you know, knowing that, you know, our sort of bird subjects, if you like, perhaps better than anything else that we photograph.
Yeah, I think it's crucially important. I mean, because there's a level and sense of danger that's involved there too, especially with venomous snakes. If you're diving with sharks, whereas, you know, we don't have to worry about a warbler or a crane, you know, kicking our butt or sending us to the emergency room. So that adds a different dynamic. I mean, understanding the animal's behavior is really crucial. Matt, maybe you want to speak to that a little bit in terms of how you apply your knowledge of these different species in the field in terms of getting close, using macro lenses and so forth.
Yeah. So, I mean, with regards to like the quote unquote dangerous subject matter, like you said, rattlesnake or venomous snakes, sharks, which would be the two things that I photograph most often that would be considered dangerous. It's always best to like be on the side of caution, even if you have done it 1,000 times, which I have. But understanding behavior of a specific animal or a species is critical when you do things like that, because if you can read the language if you can read the body language of a rattlesnake, you're going to be much safer off dealing with and photographing that animal than if you've never seen one before. You just walk right up to it and start taking pictures. And same with sharks. You can, if you have spent enough time in the water with them, you can read a lot of their body language. You know which ones you want to keep an eye on, which ones will be good subjects, which ones not to bother with. And especially when you're dealing with those, you can't get complacent and careless, which I have done, and it has landed me in the emergency room with regards to rattlesnakes. I don't know if either of you guys know that story, but I'll tell it. Vipers are known for, with rattlesnakes especially, if there's one, there's often another one not too far away. They tend to hang out in the same areas, especially when they're during winter or when they get close to their denning seasons.
Yeah, sort of hibernaculums and those sorts of things. Yeah.
So there used to be a spot in Florida that was really good for pygmy rattlesnakes. They were everywhere, but they were restricted at this wildlife refuge to one pretty specific spot. So all of these rattlesnakes were in one spot. I knew that. I just got careless. I was photographing one and I put my hand down on another one that I never saw, and it got me on the finger and sent me to the ER for a week. So I think one of the biggest things with potentially dangerous wildlife is, even if you've been around them a lot, which I had at that point, you still can't get careless. And you still have to, remember where you are, and that these things, even if they haven't been dangerous to you in the past or caused any harm in the past, they have the potential to cause a lot. So it's now at this point, even if I think I understand the behavior or something, I'm always going to be way more cautious than I would have been before, because as much as I like getting a cool picture, it's not worth another week in the ER.
No, I'd imagine that was a bit rough.
It was not a good time. The only positive out of that was that I learned without dying or losing a limb to be much more careful in the field. And also they had these cool like leg massagey things that they kept on my legs to stop my blood from clotting, which felt really cool. So that was another positive out of the experience. But other than that, it was pretty much all negatives, and not something I would recommend. I'm sure you can buy those things without having to go to the ER for them.
Yeah,
And that's
I mean,
good to know, because
I mean, we only have one venomous snake in the UK,
Yeah.
and of course
it's the adder, right? Is it the
yeah,
adder,
the
Rob?
European adder, and their numbers are dwindling in a shocking way, really. I mean, I remember as a child, we, in the area I lived and I went to school, was very, very good for adders. It was heathland basically, and that's what they love. And I remember school, sports days where we'd be on the playing field and we'd see them, basking in the sunshine. But now, particularly in the last 10 years, I think the numbers have absolutely plummeted. I mean, I remember there were still certain areas, around where I used to live, where were fairly reliable. Again, Matt, as you were saying, that you go in there in February or March when they're just emerging from hibernation, and those sort of warm days that you get, those warm mornings, they'd be out and they'd be sunning themselves. And you'd be, if you knew where those areas were, you had a reasonable chance of seeing one. But I haven't seen one in that location for a number of years now, which is really quite worrying. But you do have to be careful. They don't, and I don't know if this is true of the rattlesnake because I don't know the species, but snakes, well, the adder in particular, it doesn't want people around. It will shy away from people. If it hears you coming, it'll slither off somewhere. It doesn't want the confrontation. It doesn't want to, it'll do anything to avoid it. And the bite is really the last resort, because why waste venom on something that when just protecting yourself, you need the venom to feed and eat. So I think that's a bit of a misconception with snakes. And generally speaking, as you were saying, Matt, they'll only bite if you tread on them or put your hand on them or you corner them, and they feel that there's no other way out. I mean, I said I don't know whether rattlesnake is the same, but I assume so.
Pretty much, yeah. Almost all the venomous snakes that I've come across, I mean, I've been struck at maybe a couple times, but like you said, most of them probably feel like they're cornered, and that's how they're going to escape. Or you try to move one off the road, and it takes exception to you picking it up with a stick and moving it, and it'll strike at you then, just because it doesn't know that you're attempting to help. But pretty much every subject, whether it's reptiles or something else, is going to, their first reaction, if it feels stressed, is to get away. It's not going to try to attack necessarily, unless it's protecting its young or something like that. At least that would be my assumption.
Yeah, and what's so unique about this type of shooting, well, amphibians and reptiles, that is subject distance. Whereas, birds, mammals, a lot of the shooting is with a telephoto lens. You're up close and personal, right? With these animals, and you're really shooting a lot of macro, right? So if you don't know macro, I feel like you're at a bit of a disadvantage shooting these subjects, because you can get toads and we've shot together, and I've learned a lot of great tips from you as it relates to macro and flash, and it's really a unique type of shooting, wouldn't you say, in terms of herps and or herping in general, just any of that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, it's like wildlife photography itself is a pretty niche thing, and then you have your niches within that, and I think reptiles and amphibians are one of the smallest niches of that. And then people who photograph them beyond with their cell phone or something, just as a record of seeing it, that section of people is even smaller. So there's not, if you Google bird photography if you Google it, you're going to have 10,000 articles on how to photograph birds. If you Google the same thing for reptiles, you're going to have some, but it's not going to be nearly the number of resources you have for birds. So a lot of this stuff you just kind of figure out on your own, or if you have friends that you can go with and they've done it before. But for me, what I like to do with, especially reptiles, amphibians, especially because they're so maligned, I would say, by the general population, my goal with photographing them is to try to photograph them in a way that might interest people, that they are actually really beautiful animals, And sure, some of them are dangerous. Sure, you may not like them because they creep you out or something like that, but that they're still beautiful. And like people do that like, I'll give an example for me. I do not like spiders. Spiders freak me out. I don't want them on me. I don't want them near me. But I can recognize that they are really cool if I see a cool picture of one. Doesn't mean I want them. It doesn't mean I'm going to hold it, but it means I can respect it as an animal, as a subject matter. I'm like, oh, that thing's really cool, but it's better over there. But I think if you can do that for, things like snakes or sharks, which are, I would say, probably more maligned even than spiders. Like that's a powerful thing if you can get somebody to recognize that they're beautiful and they're not out to harm you or hurt you or kill you or eat you or any of that kind of thing. So I think my main goal with photographing reptiles especially is to try to show them off in the most favorable way possible. Or to make
show the beauty of the animal as opposed to
yes.
This sort of sinister reputation that a lot of them
like
have.
certain things like rattlesnakes or copperheads or vipers, they look sinister, like their angles, their textures, all that kind of things, their eyes especially because they have that vertical pupil. So it can, but then it's about showing off that sinisterness. I don't know if I think it's a word, but I'll try it. Sinisterness in a beautiful way. So, and not that they're to be demonized or not that they're gross or creepy or anything like that.
Well, I think that sort of, to say demonized is quite a good word, because when you think about the way we try and represent evil or, something, bad, it's generally in that sort of reptilian type of way, isn't it? It's, we borrow the eyes from the reptile, we borrow the scales, it's almost sort of cold and heartless, but actually there's a real beauty in these animals that I think people perhaps haven't appreciated. So to photograph them in that sort of way. But you're right. I guess if you counted up the number of bird photographers to sort of reptiles and amphibian photographers, or where the main focus is, that I mean, it's just it's vastly different. I mean, everybody photographs birds.
Exactly. Like I photograph birds. I'm not a bird photographer. So like, but then, birds are accessible to everybody. You don't necessarily have to go looking for birds. Like they're kind of always around. You have to go looking for certain species, but you can go out in your backyard and put a feeder up, and next thing you know, you have, 20 bird species there. You can't do the same thing with reptiles, amphibians. So I think their elusiveness is part of the appeal, but I think it also keeps a lot of people necessarily from having access to them and then necessarily learning about them and appreciating them, which is interesting to me because I think one of the things that got me into them, especially as a kid, is that they're tactile. Like you can pick up a toad, you can pick up a garter snake, you can pick up a turtle and, inspect it. And I'm not saying you should do that like every time you see one, but as a kid, like that's a great way to get into them, is just because you can hold them, you can show people, you can feel them, you can see that they're not going to try to hurt you or injure you in any way. And whereas you can't necessarily do that with a bird. Like go try to catch a duck with your hands and see how that works out for you. It's not going to happen. But
that's a good point. The tactile piece, you're right. And that's not something I'm used to. Like when we went out to shoot, it's a whole different experience. And I think shooting herps actually makes you a better bird photographer and vice versa. I mean, just the way artificial light can be used in those close-up tight settings, it defies common law. When we shoot birds, you usually have the flash overhead, right? You don't know, you want flash at an angle if you're up close and how it diffuses. So all those concepts, I think, can make bird photographers better. It's made me a better shooter, frankly, in terms of how I use light and angles and stuff, mammals, all of that. And I think a lot of it is a stigma too. I think what we were just touching on before, like people just aren't as attracted to reptiles, snakes especially, versus birds. And a lot of that may come from, I guess if Adam and Eve were tempted by a bunny rabbit, it would be different, right? I mean, a lot of it goes back to, cultural references and stuff like that. And it's just ingrained in people.
For sure. But I think I will say there's For photography purposes, if you can leave a snake or a frog as you found it, do it. And that's what I do for the ones that I photograph. But I think if you can, say you're bringing a friend out who has, and I can't remember if we actually found anything non-venomous, Josh, when we were shooting together. They might have all been venomous things. But if you can find something that's not venomous, yeah, and you can show that to somebody. Like, you can pick it up, let them hold it, all that kind of stuff. Even if you do that once, next time they go out and they shoot, they think, oh, that thing's pretty cool. I'm gonna take some pictures of it, and they'll leave it as it is and carry on.
Yeah.
But I think that's a way that people can get into them.
We found a garter snake, Matt, and I didn't realize this. It stink, that whatever they emit.
Oh yeah, they're
Oh
much
my
just
God.
gnarly.
Yeah, it's like the grass snake we have here. That's their defense mechanism. You pick one up, and your hand, they will emit this absolute. It just absolutely stinks. It's horrible.
And there's nothing you can do to get it off. Like, it stays on there until it goes away.
Exactly.
Can you use tomato juice? Is that like an urban legend? They say if you get sprayed by a skunk. I've never been sprayed by a skunk, but they say if you bathe in tomato, I don't know. It's probably an urban legend.
I don't know. I've never tried the tomato. It's kind of one of those things where you just accept that you're going to be stinky for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, who has enough tomato ketchup to be able to bathe in it, Josh? Come on. It might be different in your house.
It's just this whole refrigerator is just in case you get sprayed by a skunk.
But this, I think that whole thing about, if you're not used to amphibians and reptiles and actually handling them, I think that does change people's attitudes completely. I mean, as I said, everybody knows I do toad patrol. I've discussed it enough times on the podcast before. But when I got people from the village together that had never really picked up a toad before to help pick these things up off the road during the migration season to stop them getting squashed, the first reaction was, "Oh, I don't know if I really want to pick up a toad." They were quite nervous about it. Honestly, it didn't take them long. And they pick up a few, and then they realize what an interesting animal it is, and the way they make this cute little croaking noise in the bucket. And it took them no time at all to fall in love with these things and look at them in a completely different way. It's not a disgusting, filthy toad they find in the garden and don't want to touch anymore. It's an interesting animal that they now know a lot more about, and they know a lot more about its sort of breeding habits. And the whole sort of migration thing, it becomes it's a whole different ball game, and I think that's what photography can do. And we touched on this with Jay, didn't we, last time on the podcast, Josh, and our last guest that we had, is that how photography can change attitudes. And I think that's very, very true when we're talking about amphibians and reptiles as well, in particular.
Yeah, I have the perfect example for it. So two of my best friends, I've known them since we were, for as long as I can remember, so almost 30 years now. Neither of them was at all into reptiles and amphibians. One of them hated snakes. The other one was kind of ambivalent towards them. And then I just started sending them pictures of every single snake that I found, just because first I was doing it to annoy them, because that's what best friends do. And then I was just doing it because they slowly started to show interest in it. And then, after I've done that for a while, then they're starting to message me like, "Hey, next time you go out looking for snakes, can we go? And then I'd take them out and we'd go find a salamander. They're like, "Let's go find more." And then they start messaging me, asking to go looking for these things. And now whenever they find something, they send me a picture of it, either asking what it is or being like, "Hey, look what I just moved off the road today," or whatever it happens to be. And that all started because they saw pictures of these things and were like, "Oh, maybe they're not as bad as they've been made out to be, either in their own head or by what people have told them." So like you said, I think photography and it's not just with regards to this, photography is a powerful tool in general, but specifically with regards to maligned animals, it can be really powerful in changing people's perceptions of them. And the same goes for sharks too. Like, everybody's with, potentially it's fair. Everybody is kind of a little sketched out by sharks. Because they can be big, they have potential to cause a lot of harm. But if you show people beautiful pictures of them, then maybe you can get them in the water with them. And then they're like, "Oh, cool, these things, yes, they can be dangerous, but they're not out to get you. The vast majority of the time, you're just in their environment. They're going to ignore you. They might swim up and eyeball you real quick to see what you are and then carry on their way." But photography is good for introducing people to things that they wouldn't get introduced to otherwise.
And Jaws has a lot to answer for.
Oh,
Yes, indeed.
That turned the tide, didn't it? I mean, that really got people freaked out. I think.
Yes.
When was it?
Yeah, I mean, an amazing film, but I mean, it didn't do much for the poor old shark, really, did it?
Yeah.
No, it did not. And then I also have a fascination with super weird fish. So like the weirder the fish, the better. And these aren't things that most people would ever even know exist, and certainly wouldn't necessarily care about. But half of my Instagram page is all weird fish that I've photographed. And I like to try to make them look as, you want to emphasize their weirdness, but also kind of make them look kind of cute and endearing. And then people might start, caring about a frogfish or whatever it happens to be. And in those cases, I like to emphasize whatever, with pictures, I like to emphasize whatever their unique characteristic is. So frogfish have a lure, they cast it out and they wave it around and hunt fish that way. They're a shallow water angler fish is what they are. So you try to capture the lure out. Or we were just in Iceland and we were diving with wolffish, and wolffish are.
I was going to mention wolffish actually.
Yeah,
you photographed those, yeah.
So I just saw my first ones the other day. They're actually a blenny, and most blenny species are 3 or 4 inches long. Wolffish can get up to 6 feet, and they have these really gnarly teeth that they don't all point in the same direction. They kind of stick out of their mouth in weird ways. I think they're pretty cute. Most people would not agree with me, but I was trying to emphasize the teeth the other day. So I got really close to one and was waiting for it to open its mouth, because they breathe. Whenever they breathe, they open their mouth and close it again. And I got a couple pictures of them with the mouth, slightly open. You can see all the teeth, and frankly looks unpleasant, but also kind of cute in a weird way too.
It's the weirdness, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
The weirder the better. I always tell people, if something's super weird, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy it as a subject way more.
What's the weirdest looking thing you think you photographed?
Oh, I don't know. The wolffish and wolf eels are up there just because they look completely unlike anything else. But frogfish are weird. Batfish are weird. I think I've become a little jaded to the frogfish and batfish in the sense that I see them so often locally in Florida that they don't necessarily seem super weird to me now. But if you show the average person a batfish, they're going to be like, "What the hell is that thing?" Because they're also an angler. They have a big nose. They have a lure under their nose that they can cast out. They don't really swim. They have feet. They walk. They have big pouty lips, and they're almost perfectly triangular. So there's a lot of weird fish. There's a lot of weird fish out there. Just fortunately, no shortage of them.
Let me ask you this, Matt. When you're shooting underwater, do you have a primary setup in terms of what type of lens you like to use, focal length? And I find it interesting because a lot of the shots that I see underwater, and I don't shoot underwater, but these are wider focal lengths. I mean, people are not going underwater with telephoto lenses by any means, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, water, no matter how clear the water is, it's never going to be as clear as air. So like 100-foot visibility in water is fantastic. But if you could only see 100 feet in air, you'd be like, what the hell's going on today? So you can't really use long lenses, because then you still have to be super far from your subject, and you lose detail and color and contrast and all that kind of stuff. So my favorite focal lengths are fisheyes. So I use a 13 mil fisheye. It says 13 millimeter. It's roughly a 16 millimeter fisheye. And then I use a 90 mil. I shoot Sony currently, so I also shoot 90 mil macro. And then a company called Nauticam, who's kind of at the forefront of underwater optics and housings and stuff like that, have what's called the EMWL. It's extended wide macro lens. So it has a very small front optic, and it is a wet mount. So you mount it on the outside of your port in front of a macro lens, and it allows you to shoot small subjects, super close focus wide angle. So if anyone knows what like the Laowa 15 millimeter is, or their probe lens, it's a similar concept to that, just for underwater with really high image quality. And close focus wide angle is my absolute favorite type of picture to shoot. So I posted quite a few pictures on my Instagram recently using that setup, the 90 mil with the EMWL, shooting frogfish, batfish, turtles, all that kind of stuff. Because it allows you to get just the extreme wide angle macros that you can't get even with a small fisheye or something like that. And for a lot of those weird those weird macro subjects, being able to put them in context can be pretty important, because then you get to see how they fit into their environment. It might allow you to see the animal a bit better versus seeing just like a face, a face portrait or something like that, which can still be cool. But for the average person, if you show them the face of a frogfish, they're going to look at it and be like, what the hell is that thing? But if you can show them the whole animal, and you can see its feet and its mouth and its eyes and the shape of its body. But so those are the lenses I use the most. Will either be the bare 90 mil, a fisheye, or the 90 mil with the extended wide macro lens. And then, once in a while you use a wider focal length macro or something like that. But typically I'm going with one of those three setups in every dive. And you just kind of decide ahead of time if I'm going to shoot fisheye or whatever else, depending on what you're going to be shooting.
Difficult to change lenses while you're under the water.
Yeah. So there are certain optics you can do that with that are wet optics, where if you like, Sony has like a 28 to 60 mil lens, and there's a couple different wet optics that you can take on and off underwater. So you can shoot wide stuff, you can shoot macro stuff. So those have been really convenient, and we're restricted to doing that with compact cameras, but now you can do it with full frame mirrorless DSLR, which is really nice. And it certainly makes things a bit less stressful ahead of time if you're not necessarily super worried that you're going to miss something, if you can bring wide and macro in the same dive. Which is nice. And because
the usage of artificial light's probably tougher underwater, because you normally have two strobes on each side. Whereas if you're shooting a frog, snake, or whatever, you can really manipulate the light in terms of what angle you want it to come from, and you're more restricted, I guess.
Yes. So in a way, you're not, because you bring your light source, you have two of them, and you can you don't have to hand hold something or put something on a tripod. You have them on arms. You can kind of put them wherever you want. The challenge is, lighting is the most important thing in photography, no matter what kind of photography you're doing. Underwater, you have the added challenge if you have backscatter, I like backscatter in pictures, which, if people don't know, is all like the flecks and specks and things that are floating around in the water that reflect light back. Obviously, the key, you want to reduce that as much as possible in most situations. So certain angles will be better for that. But that's probably the biggest thing that people struggle with is backscatter and not having it ruin a picture. But then also, like you said, you're also restricted sometimes based on how long your strobe arms are. So you can't necessarily put a light behind something if you wanted to, unless you have really long strobe arms. So I personally I think I have two 12-inch sections on each side. So I have 24, and with clamps and things like that, it's probably closer to 30 inches on each side. So I can backlight it if I want to. I can side light. I can do all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So it's more. It can be a bit more cumbersome, at least if you're not used to it. But it allows you to do things allows you to light in ways that you couldn't light otherwise if you were using like shorter arms, or if you were using a single arm segment or something like that. And I like moody, contrasty things. So I like having light at an angle or behind or something like that. Whether it's underwater or topside.
Just sort of in a sort of flat, straightforward way. Much more interesting.
So like, for example,
a lot of your pictures,
so for example, like the wolffish, which I haven't posted yet, they have a really wrinkly, textured face. And if you shoot them flat, you're going to lose a lot of that. So I shot with them with this, even though I was shooting wide angle, I shot with the strobes out wide and angled inward. So all the texture on the face shows up, and you can see how lumpy and wrinkled they are. And it just makes it in my opinion, makes for a more interesting picture than if you're just lighting something, and everybody knows this. If you put a flash on top of the camera and point it straight out, you have no shadows, you have nothing. You just have that flat. You might be sharp, but it's super boring looking, in my opinion. But if you angle that flash even just a little bit, and you start getting interesting shadows and things like that, it makes the picture far more compelling, in my opinion.
And this is probably a dumb question, because I don't know much about underwater photography, but I know what I see. And you'll see shots where, you have the subject, whatever it is, and it's all black around it. It's like black water. And then others, you have the blue water and the different colors. Is that just simply the difference between letting some ambient light in so you can see some color in the water versus just flashes of main light where you're just lighting the subject and it's like a super quick? Is that the difference?
Sometimes, yeah. So a lot of people want to shoot black background, and it's actually probably the easiest type of picture to shoot, because because all you have to do is crank your shutter speed up, close down your aperture a little bit, lower your ISO, and then, make slight tweaks to either the strobe position or find a subject that has nothing behind it, and you've got a black background. The challenge is if you have a subject that's not in a pleasing spot or doesn't have open water behind it, and then you have to use strobe angles and things like that to isolate it from whatever it's behind. Or if you're trying to have something that has a nice colorful background, that can be a challenge as well. And you just slow your, open your aperture a little bit, slow your shutter speed down. Fortunately for people using flash, you can shoot super slow shutter speeds and your flash is still going to freeze it. And you can use that to, I think, and one of the wild art things, I had a picture awarded and we talked about that a lot using, slow shutter and
you use that ambient light, didn't you? And then rear curtain, flash to freeze it. And you got all this sort of movement and then, a nice sharp image, amongst that. So it was the combination of those two things, which I think really, made that picture stand out. And that, because what I really liked about that, and it was the salmon, wasn't it?
Well, we had that and then gar. I think it was the gar.
Yeah. Oh, the gar. Yes, the gar, of course. But the salmon
one, right?
Yeah. The salmon really stood out to me because of the bubbles in the water, the air in the water. They came across. They were really energetic. They were sort of feeling the real feeling of energy because there was the movement in those. Yet you had, this sort of frozen picture of a fish. It was, the salmon. It was very obvious, but you still had the motion created by that ambient light around. It was fantastic. That combination was really great. It was one of those
black
images
and white
really
too. They looked great in color and black and white. I've seen different variations, of course, through the
one thing that I always tell people is that they shouldn't be afraid of slow shutter speeds, especially underwater, because underwater it's a very chaotic place. Even though it seems like serene when you're just kind of floating there and blowing bubbles and things like that, it's constantly moving. It's very unusual for something to be static underwater. And if you can show that in your pictures, and especially with regards to the salmon, like salmon live a brutal life, and those rivers that they're swimming up to breed are just ripping constantly. It's not, so I think that helps convey what it's like to be underwater, to not just necessarily showing the environment, but using a slow shutter to show the movement and in some cases the brutality of an underwater environment works really well. And
more aesthetically pleasing too, frankly.
That as well. A lot of times it just makes, and I think we talked about this in that wild art on the YouTube thing, is that you kind of just never know what you're going to get if you use slow shutter in a really fast-paced environment. You take the picture and it's not necessarily what it's going to look like when you look at it on the back of the camera, which for me is really enjoyable because you get all sorts of weird effects from a fast-moving subject or a fast-moving environment and a slow shutter with flash. So I really enjoy that because it's kind of, you can shoot 500 pictures of the same subject, but none of them are going to look the same just based on everything that's going on around it or the slight movements that the subject makes as the shutters open. So I really enjoy that aspect.
No, it's really cool. I mean, you can get some really cool images. I mean, I can think of, we were talking about this, Josh, before, about the kingfisher image, for example, where you've got it was the diving kingfisher. This is on the cliches podcast we did, and you've got that. If you use that combination of ambient light and flash, as we were talking about, you get the streak of the diving kingfisher, then the sharp image of it at the end of the exposure when the flash goes. So well, I mean, that sort of thing, when it's done well, it just creates something that people just haven't seen before, and it just stops you in your tracks and go, oh no, that is exceptional. And those are the images that I always look out for.
One thing I've been trying to figure out, and I've yet to do this in a way that looks interesting or realistic, is try to do slow shutter with any sort of reptile or amphibian, because most of them don't move very much. And if they do move, they're either slow or they move like that and you can't catch it. So I've tried to do some slow shutters like turtles walking or things like that. And so far I have not been successful. But that's an endeavor that I'm working on, is to try to do some slow shutter reptile photography that doesn't look for lack of a better word, stupid.
But it's doing something different again, isn't it? It's not doing the and I get the impression with you that, and you've alluded to this anyway, is that you photograph what you come across as you come across it, rather than trying to manipulate something into a situation that you want it to be in. You are taking a representation of what nature provides for you, and working around that, rather than manipulating a situation to get the image that you want and you've had in your mind.
Yes. And I will say, I think that's, especially with reptiles and amphibians, that's been an evolution. So like when I first started out, I was like, I just want to catch it and then put it somewhere and take its picture. And because I thought that was the best way to get cool pictures of them. And now, as you evolve, it's like, I'd rather be able to photograph it either how it is, because that's what it's doing. Like that's naturally how it is. Or if it's not necessarily doing something interesting or in a cool spot, how do you to figure out how to photograph it in an interesting way despite that? Or you just pass on and go to something else because it's not worth it's not worth it. And one of the things sorry Josh, I'll let you I just want to get this thought out before I forget it. It's one of the things I appreciate about underwater photography is you kind of can't manipulate any of that thing. Like sure, there are certain subjects where you could poke them, prod them, and get them into the right position, but you're kind of you just have to let them be, because everything moves. You can't catch it. Like you just have to, you have to look for moments or well-placed subjects versus making them happen necessarily, which I think is part of the challenge, but also part of the enjoyment is you just kind of have to take whatever nature gives you.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing, what you just mentioned in terms of what nature gives you, especially for amphibians and reptiles. It's hard, from what I've seen and just my own experience and what you see in photography, to capture behavior, because most of the shots, they're just sitting there, right? The snake is curled up or the frog is there. Maybe the frog's calling, but unlike different other types of wildlife photography, it's very, very difficult to come across a moment where there's going to be, I don't know, whether it's a predator-prey situation or a movement situation. Behavior is probably very difficult to capture in that genre. Am I right, Matt?
Yeah. So so you end up looking for behaviors that are like super simple, like it's snake flicking its tongue or something like that, or a turtle with its one of its feet up as it walks instead of all 4 feet planted on the ground. And you can definitely find those like superstar behavior moments. If you find, I've never seen it, like you have a rattlesnake eating a squirrel or something like that, or you have, you get snakes in combat, like 2 males in combat or something like that. But those are I've seen, thousands of snakes. I've only seen them feeding 3 times. Wow. I've never seen males in combat. I've never seen snakes mating. So you're right. Capturing behavior on those things is very, very difficult to do, which I think goes back to them just representing them in the most beautiful artistic way possible, because you can't necessarily capture cool moments of them unless, it is cool to see them like perfectly coiled next to a log and you can just shoot that as is and leave them be. And that's, but that's not necessarily a compelling behavior. So that if you can get compelling behavior shots of herps, that's really cool because it doesn't happen very frequently.
I had one on my property actually just happen. I intervened and I shouldn't have.
Oh yeah.
In hindsight, because that little, I can't say it, but this Eastern cottontail was like it was just born, or it was like maybe a day old. And when they're that young, they just kind of sit there motionless and hope. Yeah. There's a huge rat snake that was so I moved the rat snake. I shouldn't have. My garden's for it. This thing is chowing down on everything, and it's too big now. I'm hoping he comes back and gets him, but I think he's gotten too big already. So, and I intervened. I shouldn't have, but I just it looks so cute, and I'm like, do I really want to see this?
It's one of the things when you see them on nature documentaries, and you see like some poor helpless little thing that's about to get mauled by a predator, like. I don't know, in those situations, like what you're supposed to do. Yeah. I don't know that I'd be able to resist.
I mean, Josh, you should have got your camera out. You should have,
I thought about it. By the time I come back, I figured the lump would be. I mean, it would be over. So I'm like, I better, But I'm conflicted over it. And in a way, I think I did the wrong thing because I've had replace a lot of plants already, and I'm like at war with this. I mean, the rabbit's so cute, or the cottontail. He just lounges and just he lives in my pollinator garden now, which is like my little prize thing I've been working on. But
he's told all his
doing you a
mates
favor.
now. He said this guy protects us from the snakes. You want to come around here? And he provides all these lovely plants for us to eat.
Yeah, basically.
That's the bad move. But I know what you mean. You can't help it. It's like, when a sparrowhawk comes down in the garden, and it'll take something or other. You can't help but feel, oh, I wish I'd, something I could have done. But everything's got to eat, hasn't it? I mean, it's it's part of, it's part of nature's cycle. But so I do try not to. But I know what you mean. But isn't it weird how it's only us humans that have this sort of emotional attachment with that sort of behavior? And we feel sorry for these things that are being eaten. I mean, you've been to Africa, you've seen kills and things like that. I mean, what sort of emotions run through you when you're watching that?
Yeah. I think it all depends on the aesthetic and the animal, right, and the culture around it, right? So obviously, I'm looking. The bunny looks cuter than the snake, so you defer to the bunny, right? So I think a lot of that is just how we're programmed, actually. Maybe it's
but the lion's got fur and it looks reasonably, well, I'm not say cute, but it's fluffy and cuddly, so you don't mind it killing the odd antelope here and there.
I mean, if you see a warthog, it's not like, oh, that's the cutest little thing, It's like, oh, okay, let's get the bloodshot with the teeth.
So it's all about aesthetics with you. Nice.
I think so. Yeah, maybe that's we're learning something here on the podcast.
Yeah, well, it's like that. It's like those things. If you're watching nature documentaries, and if they're telling it from the perspective of one animal, you end up rooting for that animal. But it could be the same two animals, and they're telling the story from the perspective of something else, and then you're rooting for the other one. Like the classic example is like the leopard seals and penguins. If it's a documentary about leopard seals, you're like, hell yeah, go get that penguin. Yeah. But then if they're doing a documentary about poor little penguin babies and the leopard seal comes up and takes its mom, you're like, oh no, like the poor little penguin.
Yeah, that's very true.
It's the same kind of thing. It's just
but it's the way things are manipulated, I guess. And talking about sort of manipulation, what's your? I mean, when we talk about reptile and amphibian photography, it does have a reputation for, as we were sort of suggesting earlier, the setup shot, the classic, tree frog type situation, or any of those types of images where we know that in the majority of situations they aren't completely natural. They have been manipulated to a degree, and in some circumstances they are complete setups. What's your take on that, and the way that you'd like to see photography sort of go?
So I personally, especially with the reptiles and amphibians anymore, the only time I'll catch them is if I'm moving them off the road or if I'm catching one to show somebody. And in those situations, I'll almost never photograph them unless it's something exceptional that I moved off the road, and I'll take a picture of it once it's off the road. With regards to those things, like where people have frogs, doing pull-ups off branches, and they have a butterfly on its head and all that kind of stuff. That stuff's disgusting to me because the frog is probably tied there or glued there. The insect's probably tied there or glued there. So that stuff, I think that's a whole other category that I don't really want to deal with. Oh, my computer stopped flashing. Cool. I can turn the camera back on. So I think that's a whole other thing. And it drives me nuts when you see like big, and I actually called, I think it was Canon posted one time, the Canon Instagram page. And I commented on it, kind of giving them shit for posting I think it was a snail on the head of a frog or something like that. And I called them out, and it blew up, and they took the picture down, which was cool of them to do it, but I don't know why they should have known better in the first place. With regards to like just the average person catching a snake and posing it and things like that, I'm not going to do it, but I don't necessarily think it causes too much harm. They're pretty low stress animals, and it's easy to tell if they are stressed. And I think if you're not pushing them past that, amphibians is one thing because they can be very delicate. They're pretty sensitive to disease, and their things are easily transmitted through their skin. So with regards to them, the less you can touch them, the better. With reptiles, if you wanted to catch a snake and pose it, I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to do it anymore, but I'm not necessarily against it as long as you're not tormenting the thing. And, you know, most people who are doing that aren't going to try to, you know, enter those pictures in competitions and try to pass it off as this is how I saw it. They're just taking them because they want a record of the animal, and then they're going to let
You'd
it
be
on its way.
surprised.
Well, I know, but I think for most of them, they're just taking a picture to record a cool animal, and then they're going to let it go and go on its way.
Yeah.
And I don't really have a problem with that. I do think if their audience doesn't necessarily know about reptiles, I think it would still be better to explain how they got that picture, just so, you know, people don't think that this is how these things are found. But as long as they're not being deceptive about it, I don't necessarily think it's a problem. You know, if there's clearly sensitive species, then I wouldn't do it with those. If you have rattlesnakes at a den site or something like that, don't go hooking them to put them on a rock that's nice and clean and take pictures of them like that for an hour and a half. Just let them be. But if you're catching a king snake off the road or something like that, and you're trying to get it to pose in a leaf litter for 5-10 minutes, you're not doing it any real harm. And if you're just taking a picture so you have a record of a cool animal, I don't really have an issue with that. And I think that's one of the advantages on one hand of reptiles and amphibians is you can catch them and hold them and things like that, which I think is important for getting people to be interested in them. Because like you said, most people don't find them cute and cuddly like they would find, a bird or a fox or something like that. So you might need to get that hands-on to really start to find them interesting or care about them.
And even getting them off the road, right? I mean, that's half the battle. I mean, it breaks my heart, just driving around and seeing all the roadkill, snakes especially, and even frogs. I mean, right after a rainstorm, I'll go out. I'm, dodging toads all over the road. Most people don't care. They just
they don't. They're just driving, or they don't even know that they're there. They're just like they don't even acknowledge something in the road. They're just driving.
Yeah,
and it's you can't necessarily fault them for it, but
I mean, I've seen enough toads being squashed in front of my eyes by people that just don't care. It's heartbreaking, especially when you've got an amplexus pair. That's the worst for me. Or you've got a gravid female. So you're picking up the carcass and all the spawn from the road, and that's the next generation. Right there on the road. It's just and you said a lot of people. Well, even if they do know, some people just don't care. It's but with the whole manipulation thing, I think the issue with some of that stuff is that the more you see it and the more it is presented on social media and the more people like it, the more people want to do it. So and it's promoting the right sort of photography, I think is very important. And with subjects like amphibians in particular, it's easy to manipulate them because, as you say, they're relatively easy to catch if you know where they are. And then it's not like you're trying to catch a bird or a mammal that's going to outrun you. You can pick them up and put them in all sorts of situations should you choose to do so. But for me, I do find that sort of thing quite distasteful, I have to say.
Yeah, and like I said, I used to do it, so I'm as guilty as anyone. But you evolve as you age and as you spend more time doing this. And I think as long as I've done those sorts of things. I've done. I've picked up toads and put them in places and photographed them before. So I'm not going to say I've not done it, because I have. I've tape lured birds before. I'm not going to say I haven't. But you get to a point in your photography when you realize that actually that's not really the way it should be done. And quite frankly, the images that result from that don't really portray nature as it is, and therefore it's not. There's a falseness about it that now comes through in those images for me. Yeah, and I think that took some time for me to understand or come to realize is like, oh, this isn't necessarily wildlife photography. You're taking a wild animal and photographing it, but it's not wildlife photography. So now when, especially with reptiles and amphibians, if you can get one as found, that's for me, it's a much more rewarding thing to get a cool picture of it that way than to have set the whole thing up and then taken, a cool picture, because it's not, like I said, it's not really wildlife photography at that point. It's outdoor captive wildlife photography. And everybody has their different lines as to what they find acceptable with regards to that. And it's just, again, if I would, as long as you're not harming the animal in any real way, I guess that's the most important thing. But for, ethical, true wildlife photography, the hands-off approach is the best approach.
Yeah, and I think probably competitions have a big part to play in that as well.
Absolutely, for sure.
What images they award, and I mean, I've taken a bit of a break with wild art, as everybody knows, but I want to bring that back next year, and I'm going to take a much tougher line with, the ethics behind, the photographs. So there won't be images that, are set up, if you like, those sort of manipulated situations. I'm not looking to award those, because it's, I want the competition to be all about the art and all about showing nature as it should be shown in its natural state, if for want of a better phrase, because I can't think of anything else that's more apt. But that's where I want the competition to go. And I think people that are running wildlife competitions, and I can think of 2 or 3 that do take a similar stance now. I think they have a responsibility, because it's it's what they award, it's what they show. They've got to realize that people are going to want to emulate that, because that's what happens. I mean, we've talked about copycat images before. As soon as an image gets awarded, if you're talking about a bird image, the diving gannets is the absolute classic. People want to take that image, and it's exactly the same. If we all award a posed frog on a flower, or with an insect on its head, or whatever, people are going to want to take that shot. It's it's the way it is. So if you're promoting that, then you're just creating this sort of cycle.
The one example of this that I think is more of a gray area is with regards to sharks. So I worked for a shark diving company. I fed sharks. I love sharks. I think feeding sharks is an awesome job. However, I support doing it, because sharks are one of those things that if you can't bring them to people, or bring people to them and then bring the sharks to them, nobody's ever going to see sharks. There aren't enough of them that you're going to come across them all the time, or that you're going to be able to see them up close and experience them up close. So you kind of have to feed them to let people experience them, and then therefore have people care about them. So when I worked in that boat, we would have people come out all the time who'd never even seen the ocean before, and then they want to go see sharks. They see sharks, like, that was the coolest thing I've ever done. And now you're like, cool, we've just made somebody who'd never been in the ocean care about sharks. And I get asked a lot do I think it is a negative? Do I think it changes their behavior? To be honest, I don't think it changes their behavior too much, because if they were relying on people to feed them, they'd all starve to death very quickly. But I do think I have seen shark images awarded in competitions, and I do think those should also, while it's not quite the same as like baiting an owl or something like that, where it can change their behavior and cause the owl to end up starving. I do think with regards to competition specifically, I do think shark images like that need to be looked at a little more closely, because it's not natural. Like, they're in their environment, but you've manipulated the environment for a positive outcome potentially, but it's still not necessarily wildlife photography. And I'm still going to go out and photograph sharks that are being fed, because it's the only way to do it. But I would never consider entering those pictures in competitions, because it's not wildlife. So I think that's one gray area with regards to wildlife manipulation, where I think it's the only way to have a positive effect on people with regards to a specific animal. But I still don't think those should be eligible for competition.
Yeah, it's such a difficult line to to tread, really.
And how do you know? I guess if you know it enough, you know that that's not going to occur. Right?
Then that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Like, you have to know a species behavior to necessarily know whether it's been manipulated or not. I would say it's safe to say with the exception of whale sharks or bottom dwelling sharks, the vast majority of shark pictures out there, except for from places like Galapagos, maybe, are baited sharks, because sharks by nature are not cool with people. They don't want to be near people. They don't want to have anything to do with people. If you see a shark, chances are it's going to see you and it's going to go the other way as fast as it can. So, which is another problem. Like, how do you get somebody without, bringing them into people with feeding? How do you get somebody to appreciate a shark when, they get that sort of a glimpse at it? And for people who aren't, I forgot what this isn't getting recorded. I snap my fingers because it's very quick.
I think we heard it.
Yeah. Okay. Just want to make sure. So, with certain things like that, I think you probably have to manipulate to some extent to get a net positive out of it. But I think there's very few of those situations with regards to wildlife photography that I would find necessarily acceptable.
I think that's what you just said there about the net positive. I think that probably is the key to it. If as you say, the ultimately there is more positives than negatives, then I think then makes it acceptable. Is perhaps the wrong word, but more palatable perhaps.
Yeah.
Than if you're taking something and giving nothing back. If you're manipulating a frog, and to get the image you want, what does the frog get out of it?
Yeah.
What sort of conservation message? What conservation message are you sending?
Yeah.
You're not. You just want a pretty picture because you want to show everybody you can take the same image that you've seen 100 times on Instagram.
Yeah. And I think the comparison I get, and I mentioned it, is with feeding sharks and feeding like raptors. Well, you can see it. You can look at a raptor in a tree from 100 yards away with binoculars and see it perfectly fine. You can't do that with a shark because, again, you can't see that far in water. Like you can't sit there. It's not going to sit there and stay static on the branch. It's going to swim and it's going to be gone. And I'll freely admit there are still times when I'm in the water on a shark feeding dive and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this. In terms of taking pictures while I'm there. As far as the experience goes, it's an experience that I think everybody should have because they're amazing animals and there's no other way to do it. But for photography, there's a lot of times where I'm like, I don't necessarily know that I want to be taking pictures, and it's better just to go in and enjoy the experience. But then again, you need to take pictures to show people that there's cool stuff out there and they need to go see it. But I've taken plenty of shark pictures, and there's plenty of other people taking shark pictures that I don't necessarily know that it's important for me to take more. But I think that's one exception with regards to manipulation that I think is probably okay.
Yeah, but when you know the subject, when you know the subject so well, you know when something isn't right. I mean, Josh, you know this with certain bird species. There are, and there were quite a few images in past competitions that I've been involved with, where you get something in and you go, you'd never photograph that bird like that without some form of manipulation, without some form of baiting, luring in some way, or. I mean, there were things.
And if you're
like,
going to do that, just say, "Hey, this is a photo of X." You get the 2-page paragraph explaining how amazing and once in a lifetime,
and most of it is bullshit. It really is, and you
the
just
sky opened up, the clouds parted, and God came down and He gave me this amazing thing, and I'll never see it again until next week. And they just
how dumb do you think I am? And I've it's turning into a rant, this podcast. Apologies for that. Well, no, I don't apologize for it actually, because I think it's a very important topic. But I mean,
not a lot in macro in this type of stuff. Most ethics that people talk about, unfortunately, in the wildlife community, it's mostly birds, mammals. But like on the macro side, underwater, you don't hear a lot of discussion around it, and I feel like it deserves more discussion, as we were just talking about. At least from what I see, from my vantage point, it's mostly birds, baiting foxes, stuff like that. That seems to be more common. The owl discussions, but I don't see a lot on macro or underwater.
So underwater, I think one of the things is like, and we'll set sharks aside because that's its own thing. Um, Manipulation of subject matter underwater is much more, it'd be much more difficult because good luck catching a fish in your hands. Like there's certain species you could do that with, but they're, you might, even frogfish are very quick when they need to be. You're not going to catch one. So I think one of the things why you hear about it less is it'd be much harder to do with regards to manipulation. And when it does come out that has been done, people get crucified immediately. So there was an example a couple of years ago of a blue ring octopus that was in a perfectly clean clamshell, and the blue ring was carrying its eggs. And they do carry their eggs, and they live in rubbly habitats, which could include clamshells. But it seemed too perfect a scenario, and it became a thing because somebody called it out. It was awarded in a competition. Somebody called it out and requested that the photographer send in the prior raw files and the after raw files. Well, all of the raw files showed the octopus just in that shell. There was nothing beforehand, nothing surrounding it. So the whole thing just seemed a little fishy. And I believe the picture got disqualified, and I don't know if the guy got, again, I don't remember his name. I would say it anyway, but I don't remember if he got banned from that competition. But like when stuff like that happens, it immediately is, it blows up, and then it's immediately shut down and taken care of. Just because I think it's unnecessary to do, and I think because I would say manipulation is almost more accepted with regards to terrestrial wildlife than it is underwater, because it's a lot more prevalent. That when it happens underwater, people are like, nah, we're not going to play this, and it gets shut down pretty immediately.
But presumably, is that because the community is a lot smaller?
I would imagine that's probably part of it, and also, the underwater world's a pretty delicate place, with a lot of delicate animals that don't necessarily, they're not used to people. So if we're down there, effing things up, they're not going to necessarily be able to withstand that. And there's of course exceptions, and just by us being there, our presence is taking an effect. But there's a difference between, being present and picking an octopus up and putting it in a shell for a nice clean picture with no, bullshit around it. But again, like you said, it can sometimes be hard to tell if you don't necessarily know the behavior of certain subjects and certain species. And I'm sure I've shared pictures on my Instagram of other people's where I just thought it was cool, and then somebody else looking at that thing like, why would you share that? It's clearly manipulated. But that comes with time and experience and exposure to all those different kinds of subject matter.
No, exactly. But I think it's it's our job as photographers, I think, to point out these things when we see them, because I just think attitudes in this area just need to be changed. I mean, I don't ever want to see things like birds being staked, live birds being staked to the ground, so a falcon can come in and kill them, and the photographer can get pictures of them, because I've seen them, and there is no, you look at them and you go, there is no way in the world you are going to get that image without that happening, because it's just not possible, not in the way it's been photographed. It's completely staged, and that I think we have a responsibility, particularly as a competition, to call those out. I know you're always going to get caught out every now and again, and people are going to call you out on it. I think that's fair enough. I don't have a problem with that. I'm a pretty thick skin these days, but that just goes as part and parcel of running a competition, I guess. There are going to be mistakes made at times.
Yeah, there's always going to be, there's probably always be a manipulation done like somebody did it for the first time and you haven't seen it yet. And you're like, oh, and it goes right by you, and then somebody else is like, oh, that's clearly staged or whatever.
And I think shots in a matter of
and I think that's the beauty of having a very diverse judging panel as well, who judges that are experienced in different areas of of the genre, because they will move in different circles and they will have seen. I mean, you know, we've had this in the judging process before when somebody said, well, actually, you know, we've all liked an image, and they go, well, actually, you need to think about this because that isn't quite right because of X, Y, and Z, whatever it might be. We ought to think about this. And we've all gone, oh, didn't know that.
Yeah.
Or you know, what we think is really
I felt
special.
that way with the underwater images, right? I mean, I would look at some things, but I didn't have the experience to know if there was something wrong. Like, you know, obviously Henley would be able to know or something.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
you know, me looking at certain things, I'm like, okay, this is aesthetically great, and I like the composition. But if there's any questions of ethics without, you know, I've never dove before or shot any of this stuff, I would have no idea, right? So yeah.
And even me, like there's so much wildlife out there. There's so many varied behaviors that I could think I'm decently well versed with underwater, and I could still see something that I'm like, oh, that's sweet. How did they get that? And then you find out from somebody else that, oh, that was because they picked it up and put it there, or they, you know, poked and prodded it until it did what they wanted it to do, or whatever it happens to be. But you know, as long as there's wildlife photographers, there's going to be ethics questions, because there's always going to be people pushing that line or finding the line or moving the line, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's just a matter of doing what you feel is acceptable and comfortable and not pushing it too far.
Yeah.
Well, I did say this was warts and all, didn't I, at the start?
Yeah. I don't even think
now, why don't we
a little bit, but.
Yeah, why don't we pivot the conversation just quickly, because I'm conscious of the time. We've been going for over an hour again. Why don't we pivot the conversation back to, you know, the actual practicalities of this part of wildlife photography, and for somebody who perhaps, you know, is not experienced in this area but is interested in getting into it, are there sort of 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would give them initially?
For reptiles or underwater?
It could be for, let's say reptiles and amphibians, just because it's a bit more accessible than underwater.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is you have to figure out, you know, what species you want to see, and then decide, or then you have to do a ton of research. So the next thing to do is do a ton of research as to when those species are most active, the habitats they prefer, the microhabitats they prefer, the weather conditions they prefer. And then, you know, I'll freely admit I have had a lot of help. And, you know, if you build a friend base in the wildlife photography community, you're going to have lots of help, and people can point you in the right directions and things like that. To say you have none of that, you know, you have to do a ton of research into the specific animal, and then go spend a lot of time in the field. So I used to think when I first started, I don't know, when I was like 10, 11, 12, my dad and I thought that reptiles were like, let's find the hottest, driest day we possibly can in the middle of summer, and let's go find reptiles. And you never do, because nothing enjoys being out in that, including reptiles and amphibians.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, depending on where you are geographically, it's going to vary as to what times of year things are the most active, what weather conditions are the most active, or things are most active in. But weather and microhabitat are probably 2 of the biggest things, and then breeding season. So everything's easier to find in breeding season because males go looking for females, frogs and amphibians are looking for each other, and everything's just out and active. It's usually not too hot,
and it's usually a lot more colorful as well. You know,
yes.
you've normally got the breeding colors as well, haven't you, in those situations? So yeah.
So I would say whatever species you're looking for, the easiest place to start is breeding season, because even if conditions aren't perfectly favorable, chances are they'll still be active because they have to be. So microhabitat, breeding season, ideal weather if you can find it, which will depend on whatever specific thing you're looking for. And then just a lot of time in the field. You could get lucky and find whatever you're looking for right away, depending on what species it is. But more often than not, it's going to take a lot of time just walking and hiking and flipping rocks and logs and looking in trees for whatever you're trying to find. And you know, that's part of the fun, because then if you do find it and you didn't have any help, that's super rewarding. Like my favorite US snake species is an eastern hognose snake. And for the longest time, I could not find them. Didn't matter where I went, how much help I got, couldn't find them. And then finally, at a place I'd been 1,000 times, I was walking the trail I've walked 1,000 times, and there's one crossing the trail at a place nobody ever gave me. I went there myself and happened to find one. And that was the coolest feeling in the world, even though I had to wait way longer than I would have wanted to find it. But it was super rewarding, and it took a lot of time and effort and a lot of research to figure it out. And I'll say, if you're traveling, get all the help you can get. Go find a guy who lives there. That's what they do, and hire them. They'll help you find it, especially if you have limited time. If you're doing something local, it's way more rewarding to go find something on your own, especially because you have endless time to do it. So why not put in a little bit of time and effort, and it'll be more rewarding that way. But if you're international or you're traveling somewhere you're not going to get to go all the time, I'm all for hiring locals. It helps them, it helps you, and
you've got a limited amount of
more
time,
success.
haven't you? If you spent a lot of money trying to go somewhere, you've got a limited amount of time. So why not take a shortcut? I mean, it's, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. But like I said, if you're doing it locally, it's pretty rewarding to figure it out yourself, especially if you can find a spot that wasn't given to you, and then you can just keep going back there, and you don't have to necessarily worry about somebody else finding it and ruining it or anything like that. And, that's one of the other things with reptiles and amphibians. A lot of those habitats get hit pretty hard if they get out, and collection is a problem too. We could get into a whole other podcast on that too, so I won't go there. But it's just for somebody looking for reptiles, microhabitat, time of year, weather, and then a lot of time in the field will be your best friends. Or
in terms of gear, presumably, if you've already got gear that you're photographing birds, mammals, whatever you're doing, pretty much, that's all you need. And I guess your friend is the macro lens. Yeah.
So my favorite herp lenses are a longer focal length macro, something that allows you to focus, like a wide angle macro of some sort, and then I have a couple flashes, but all you really need is one flash and one softbox. And if you have off-camera flash, that's even better. But that's the nice thing about herping. It's like, unlike a lot of other wildlife photography pursuits, like underwater or birds, you don't need expensive gear to get started. You can get whatever camera and whatever little flash and softbox, and you're good to go. Whereas, if you're starting out with birds, you're gonna be dropping 15 grand right off the bat. And if you're doing underwater, it's not going to be too much cheaper. There's another reason to go get into reptiles and amphibians. It's super cheap.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just hard to manipulate that softbox with one hand. If it's just you really need two people for it, because you could ask your buddy to be like, "Oh, move it over there, or move it," and it's so hard.
If you can get yourself a flash bitch, that's the best thing to have. You have them hold it. But it is doable with one person. But like Josh said, it's way easier to have somebody help you hold it. And you can kind of direct them and guide them. And fortunately for me, I wouldn't call her that, but Ariana's great at holding flashes for me when I'm not shooting reptiles and amphibians, and especially because if nobody's seen my softbox, I use a huge parabolic softbox, which I can hand hold because it has a bracket on it and a handle, but it is miserable to hold it myself. So if I have somebody there, it's much more enjoyable. And when Josh Kerm and I got out shooting,
that's even bigger than the Westcott one or whatever.
It's like 2 or 3 times as big because it's super deep too.
You need a wheelbarrow for it.
When Josh Kerm and I got out shooting rattlesnakes and copperheads one day, we were all flash pitching for each other. That was a good time. Hopefully we'll get to do it again at some point.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm gonna remember that phrase.
That's what I want really bad, is the hog.
Yeah. They're
Kerm got that, didn't he? He got the
Kerm got it.
Kerm got one with me. Yeah, he actually found it though. I thought I was going to show him up, and he got the hognose the time we found it. They're normally they're good through June in the Northeast, and this June was brutal. So they must have all nested and made it early, and then just disappeared into the woods. Because I tried for pretty much 2 weeks straight in Jersey the last 2 weeks of June.
Nothing.
Didn't even sniff one.
Wow.
It was so dry and hot. But there you go. If it had been better weather, it would have been good for hogs. But weather's not right. So I think that matters. I think especially for reptile amphibians, weather matters necessarily more than it might for other things.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
if it's too hot
I
and
say
dry,
this.
not
I
good.
say this with all our guests. We're going to have to get you back, Matt.
I would love to. I'll nerd
Subject
out.
we
I'll
can
nerd
talk
out with you
to
guys all
talk
the
about
time.
you for hours.
Yeah.
But I think maybe Flash Bitch is a good way to leave.
We've got a new hashtag here.
There you go.
Yeah,
Hashtag Flash Bitch.
exactly. Yeah, I won't use it in the title. You're okay.
If you get
The
t-shirts with hashtag.
show
Yeah,
notes.
we'll put in the show notes.
Yeah. FB. Yeah. But finally, Matt, if people want to find you, where can they go to sort of hook up with you on Instagram or whatever?
Yeah. So my website is 9milesnorth.com. So the number 9milesnorth.com, and then Instagram is formerly homeless photographer.
Fine. And of course, we'll link all that stuff in the show notes so people can check you out and go and see some of the images that we've been talking about, and a lot of your other work, of course. And hopefully that will inspire those who haven't picked up the camera to photograph amphibians, reptiles, or even take the plunge and do something underwater. And then hopefully they'll find this inspiring. So, what's next for you, Matt? What do you got planned?
So we're here for a couple of weeks, and then I'm home for a day, and then I go to Mexico to lead a whale shark trip. And then in October or end of September, I go to the Philippines for 10 days to do some diving. So that'll be cool too, to a spot I've never been. So I'm excited about it.
So, yeah, no rest for the wicked.
No, the next from mid-June to mid-October is going to be super busy, but nothing wrong with that. It's all cool stuff. So.
Nothing wrong with that. And yeah, look forward to seeing some of the pictures that result as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Matt, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on and having a chat.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Yeah, we just have to get you back again.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed our discussion. As usual, we went down rabbit holes I didn't think we were going to, but that's the nature of doing something like this and just letting it flow organically. So I hope you've enjoyed listening, and we'll see you all again next time. You have been listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast. If you have enjoyed the content, then please help us to spread the word by sharing a link on your social media platforms, giving us a like, and leaving us a comment. See you all again next time.